We did not invade Earth that morning. We insulted it, and somehow that was the mistake that ended our empire. That is the part my superiors never understood, even after the reports, even after the hearings, even after every admiral in the Concordance learned to lower his voice when saying the word human. We thought terror required fire. We thought conquest required fleets. We thought a young species could only be broken by power. So we chose something crueler than a weapon. We chose a joke. At 7:42 a.m. Eastern Time, while half the eastern United States was pouring coffee, burning toast, arguing with traffic reports, and pretending Monday had not personally declared war on them, the sky over the Atlantic Ocean opened with a sound like the planet itself clearing its throat. Every phone in New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington started recording before any government alert could explain what was happening. Children pointed out apartment windows. Fishermen stared from decks slick with morning salt. News anchors stopped mid-sentence, their polished smiles cracking as a shadow the size of a city slid through the clouds. It was our gift to Earth, the Varick-class warship Dread Mercy, 3 miles long, older than most border colonies, stripped of noble banners, stripped of command codes, stripped of dignity. Obsolete. Embarrassing. A museum corpse with engines too outdated for civilized warfare and armor plating that modern plasma lances could peel open like fruit skin. We had towed it from a military junk moon because even scrapping it cost more than it was worth. Then our fleet placed it above Earth and let gravity do the rest. Not toward a city, of course. We were arrogant, not careless. The ship came down in the Atlantic, 80 miles off the coast, slow enough for every camera to watch, loud enough for every human to remember. Its descent boiled clouds into white rings. Its hull hit the water with a mountain of spray that climbed higher than skyscrapers and rolled outward in glittering walls before collapsing back into the sea. Then the message appeared. We had burned it into the side of the hull in letters large enough for human satellites to translate. Before the steam even cleared, for the primitives. I remember laughing when the broadcast reached the command deck. All of us did. Officers clicked their mandibles, fluttered their crests, slapped polished consoles with amusement. Earth had no true fleet, no recognized seat in the high war councils, no serious place in the balance of power. They were clever mammals with rockets, stubborn politics, and entertainment networks loud enough to qualify as psychological warfare. Giving them an ancient warship was not charity. It was a reminder. You are not our enemy, the message said. You are where we throw things away. For 27 minutes, Earth said nothing. No missiles. No surrender demand. No panicked ambassador begging for clarification. Just silence, deep and unpleasant, the kind that made junior officers check instruments twice. Then one human voice entered the global emergency channel, calm, male, American, and far too tired for the scale of the moment. His name was Nathan Brooks, a naval systems engineer from Virginia, and his first recorded words about the largest alien object ever dropped on his planet were not fear, anger, or awe. He simply asked, did they leave the reactor core inside? The first ones to laugh were not the soldiers. Soldiers, at least the good ones, have a private relationship with bad feelings. They learn to respect silence. They learn that a quiet enemy is usually not confused, just busy. No, the first ones to laugh were the broadcasters. Within 1 hour of the drop, every major entertainment network from the inner systems had cut to live coverage of Earth, that small blue planet suddenly decorated with our unwanted relic. The captions were merciless. Primitive species receives first warship. Local mammals expected to discover doors by next century. One commentator, a silver-faced creature from the luxury moons of Velar, leaned toward his camera and asked whether humans would worship the vessel or turn it into a restaurant. His studio audience made that soft hissing sound our people used for laughter. I laughed too. I wish that part of the record had been lost. It was not. The clip still exists in the archives, usually played at officer training sessions right before the instructor pauses the screen on my face and says, "Notice the expression of a man who has mistaken ignorance for intelligence." From orbit, our observation drones watched the human response unfold. Ships moved toward the crash zone from every direction. Coast Guard cutters, Navy destroyers, research vessels, tugboats, news helicopters, and private fishing boats whose captains apparently believed the arrival of an alien warship was somehow their business. That was the first thing I found strange. Most species flee from military hardware they do not understand. Humans brought cameras, coffee, and arguments over radio channels. Their news anchors spoke in that confident American rhythm, as if turning cosmic humiliation into breaking coverage was simply another Tuesday. On one channel, a retired admiral with white hair and a flag pin called the ship an unprecedented security challenge. On another, a young woman in a rain jacket shouted over the wind that people along the Virginia coast had gathered at overlooks just to see the steam cloud on the horizon. They were scared, yes. Any honest species would be. But fear did not organize them. Curiosity did. That made several of my analysts uncomfortable. They began filing small notes. Unusual civilian proximity. Rapid maritime mobilization. No visible religious panic. I dismissed all of it. Humans were sentimental scavengers. Of course they were curious. Give a primitive a dead machine, and it will poke the machine with sticks until something sparks. Then Nathan Brooks appeared in the first restricted feed. Not on a stage. Not in a command chair. Not wearing medals. He arrived by helicopter on the deck of the USS Arlington wearing a dark rain jacket, safety harness, and the expression of a man called into work before finishing his breakfast. He was 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, brown-haired, ordinary in that dangerous human way that made you underestimate the machinery behind the eyes. The Americans cleared a path for him without ceremony. That was the second strange thing. No one saluted dramatically. No one announced his importance. They just moved, quickly and naturally. The way trained people move when the right person has entered the room. Nathan looked across the gray water at our discarded warship, now half submerged and steaming like a sleeping island. Someone handed him a tablet filled with scans. He studied it for 11 seconds. 11. Then he zoomed in on the central spine, tapped the screen twice, and said, "That is not a wreck." The naval officer beside him asked what he meant. Nathan did not look away from the image. He said, "Somebody wanted us to think it was dead." The hatch did not open like a door. It unfolded, reluctantly, in 8 separate layers, each one grinding back with the tired complaint of metal that had spent too many centuries pretending to be dead. Human floodlights poured into the corridor beyond, cutting through vapor, salt mist, and the stale green glow of emergency systems that should not have had power. That was the third thing my analysts marked as strange. The ship had fallen through atmosphere, struck an ocean, lost external drive response, and still something inside it was breathing. Our engineers had checked that vessel before the drop. I reviewed the clearance myself. Fuel cells inert. Main weapons removed. Navigation crippled. Command intelligence erased. Reactor classified as cold. The file used that word. Cold. A beautiful, reassuring word. A wrong word. Nathan Brooks stepped through the hatch first, which was absurd. Human command had sent drones. They had sent remote scanners. They had machines small enough to crawl through gaps and smart enough to map chambers without risking anyone important. Nathan watched those machines for less than 2 minutes, then said the feed was lying. Not broken. Lying. The naval officer beside him asked how a feed could lie. Nathan pointed at the thermal image and said, "Because the heat is too neat." I remember the silence on our command deck when that translation came through. Too neat. That was not a military term. That was not a scientific conclusion. That was the kind of phrase a mechanic used when a car engine sounded wrong before the dashboard admitted it. Humans had a disturbing habit of trusting senses they had no right to trust. Nathan walked down the corridor with one hand on the wall, his glove brushing alien alloy older than his nation. The walls were ribbed with dormant conduits. The floor tilted under him as the ship shifted in the Atlantic swell. Every few seconds, distant water pressure made the hull groan, a deep whale-like sound that rolled through the passage and made the human Marines behind him tighten their grips on their gear. Nathan did not react to that sound. He was listening for something smaller. The observation drone above his shoulder recorded his face as he stopped at an intersection where 3 corridors met. One led toward the empty weapon bays. One descended toward the flooded engine decks. One climbed toward the central spine. He closed his eyes. Closed them. Inside an alien warship. Surrounded by technology his species was not supposed to understand. That was when Lieutenant Mara Ellis, the communications officer assigned to him, whispered, "Mr. Brooks, what are you doing?" Nathan lifted one finger. "Wait." For 14 seconds, nobody moved. Even our drone held position, its stabilization field humming softly. Then Nathan opened his eyes and looked toward the central spine. There, beneath the ship noises, beneath the water, beneath the creaking of old armor, was a pulse. Not loud, not dramatic. A tiny rhythm, almost polite. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. Nathan exhaled once and said, "There you are." Back on our command deck, an older engineer named Voskar made a sound I had never heard from him before. Not fear. Recognition. He turned from his station, all 4 hands suddenly still, and asked who had authorized access to the spine chamber. I told him nobody had. He stared at the human on the screen and said, "Then why is the ship answering him?" The official human report called it a stabilization operation, which was adorable. Stabilization sounded careful. Stabilization sounded responsible. Stabilization sounded like engineers in hard hats politely asking a dangerous machine to behave. What Nathan Brooks actually did was closer to waking a giant animal by removing the chain someone else had wrapped around its ribs. By sunset, the Americans had pulled a temporary platform against the exposed upper hull, anchored by Navy vessels, Coast Guard cutters, and enough floodlights to make the Atlantic look like a football stadium before kickoff. Helicopters circled overhead. Satellites shifted positions. Every civilian boat had been pushed back beyond the security line, though plenty of them stayed out there anyway, rocking on the dark water with cameras pointed at history. From orbit, we watched the humans swarm over our dead ship like ants with college degrees. They brought welders, cranes, diving rigs, portable reactors, pressure tents, forklifts, and one coffee truck that somehow made it onto a military barge before several classified generators did. I remember one of my officers laughing at that. He said humans could not face the unknown without warm drinks. No one laughed later when the same coffee truck was connected to a field kitchen feeding 3 shifts of engineers who worked for 36 hours without slowing down. That was the part our species never understood. Humans did not need elegance to become dangerous. They needed tools, caffeine, and permission. Nathan stood inside the central spine chamber with Lieutenant Mara Ellis and a dozen specialists from agencies that refused to identify themselves even to their own allies. The chamber was shaped like a cathedral designed by machines, tall, narrow, and lined with black control columns that had not answered to any living commander in 200 years. At the far end sat the reactor casing, a smooth oval structure taller than a 2-story house, sealed under 8 interlocking restraint bands. Those bands were the reason our engineers had approved the drop. Without them, the core could not ramp. Without the core, the ship was nothing but old armor and bad memories. Nathan studied the bands for almost a minute, then asked for a socket wrench. Not a plasma cutter, not a quantum decryptor, a socket wrench. Mara stared at him. So did every alien analyst watching the feed. Nathan tapped one of the restraint anchors with his knuckle and said, "This is not alien genius. This is a lockout clamp. Different shape, same bad attitude." The first bolt took 3 humans leaning on an extension bar to move. It broke loose with a sharp metallic pop that echoed through the chamber. Nothing exploded. Nothing flashed. Nothing punished them for touching the sacred machinery of a superior civilization. That seemed to annoy Nathan more than it impressed him. He crouched closer, wiped grime from the anchor plate, and found the truth we had missed because we had trusted labels more than eyes. The bands were not part of the original ship. They had been added later. Hastily. Repeatedly. Desperately. Layer over layer, century after century, like governments passing new laws around an old problem they were too afraid to solve. Nathan read the pattern in silence. Then he stood up and said, "They did not retire this thing because it was obsolete." Mara asked why they retired it. Nathan looked at the sleeping core, and for the first time his voice lost its tired humor. Because somebody finally managed to make it stop. The recall order arrived 41 hours after the ship entered human hands, and I still remember the exact tone of the message because it was the sound of arrogance trying to disguise itself as procedure. Supreme Command did not say we were concerned. Concern implied humans had done something worthy of attention. Instead, the order stated that Earth had engaged in unauthorized salvage of Concordance military property and must immediately surrender the vessel for safe retrieval. Safe. That word did a heroic amount of lying. On the command deck, the younger officers looked relieved. Finally, they thought, The adults had returned to take the toy away from the mammals. Admiral Threx even smiled as he prepared the fleet response, arranging 3 cruisers, 6 escorts, and 1 diplomatic enforcement carrier into a formation designed less for battle than for theater. We were not coming to fight Earth. We were coming to embarrass it properly. The broadcast went out across every human emergency channel at noon Eastern Time, interrupting press briefings, weather reports, school announcements, and 1 baseball pregame show in Atlanta. A blue holographic seal of the Concordance appeared above the ocean platform, taller than a lighthouse, rotating slowly over the waves like the galaxy itself had leaned down to scold a child. Our ambassador spoke in a voice polished smooth by centuries of conquest. Citizens of Earth, your species has touched restricted material beyond your developmental rights. You will cease all activity, evacuate the artifact, and permit Concordance retrieval within 1 standard cycle. Failure to comply will result in disciplinary measures appropriate to a non-aligned civilization. It was a beautiful threat, vague enough for diplomats, sharp enough for soldiers, insulting enough for everyone else. The humans reacted exactly wrong. Their government did not panic. Their news anchors did not weep. Their social networks, according to our cultural monitors, filled with jokes so fast the translation engines overheated. One human wrote, "They gave us trash and now want it back because we looked under the hood." Another asked whether the Concordance had kept the receipt. I did not understand why that was funny, but millions of them did, which bothered me more than it should have. Then our cameras found Nathan Brooks again. He was not watching the hologram. He was underneath a restraint console with half his body inside an access port, holding a flashlight in his teeth while Mara Ellis read voltage numbers from a tablet. Someone told him the alien demand had arrived. Nathan slid out slowly, sat up on the cold floor, and asked how long they had given Earth. 1 standard cycle, Mara said. Nathan wiped grease from his cheek with the back of his wrist. Translate that into real time. 26 hours, give or take. He nodded, not surprised, not angry, just mildly inconvenienced. Then he looked toward the reactor chamber doors and said, "That should be enough if they stop interrupting me." That sentence moved through our intelligence network like a dropped glass in a silent room. Enough for what? Admiral Threx demanded. No one answered because no one knew. Down on the platform, human activity accelerated. Not chaotically, not desperately, efficiently. Cargo helicopters brought sealed containers from inland bases. Fiber cables ran from the ship to portable command centers. Civilian technicians arrived, wearing badges from universities, defense contractors, power companies, and 1 weather service laboratory in Oklahoma. That last one made my science officer blink 3 times. Why would they need a weather laboratory? Nathan answered the question 8 hours later when he stood before a wall of improvised monitors and pointed at a live map of Earth orbit. The old ship did not need weapons, he said. It needed reach. At 3:13 in the morning, Washington patched Nathan Brooks into the most crowded secure call in human history. The president was there from the White House Situation Room. The Secretary of Defense was there. Admirals, generals, intelligence directors, satellite commanders, and exhausted engineers filled screens along the temporary command wall inside the spine chamber. Outside, the Atlantic hammered the hull with black waves. Above, our retrieval fleet crossed the outer marker around the moon and began its slow, theatrical approach toward Earth. Admiral Threx wanted them to be seen. That was the point. 12 bright signatures descending through space, arranged like a crown, announcing ownership before a single word was spoken. He believed intimidation was a universal language. Humans, unfortunately, had dialects. The president looked older than the broadcasts made him appear, but his voice was steady when he asked the only question that mattered. "Mr. Brooks, can you make it work?" Every alien analyst leaned toward the feed. Nathan stood beneath the reactor casing in a gray sweatshirt, work gloves, and safety glasses pushed up into his hair. He had been awake nearly 2 days. There was a smear of oil across his jaw and a paper cup of coffee sitting on a console designed before his ancestors had invented the wheel. He looked at the monitors, then at the restraint map, then at the live orbital track showing our fleet coming closer by the minute. "Can I make it work?" he repeated, as if testing the honesty of the words. "No, Mr. President." The room went silent. On our command deck, several officers relaxed at once. I remember that. I remember thinking the farce was finally over. Then Nathan picked up a marker and drew a circle around Earth. On a transparent board. I cannot make it work the way they built it, he said. That system was designed for a ship. One ship, one field, short range. Maybe a few hundred miles on a good day. He drew a second circle, wider this time, crossing orbit, weather satellites, communication relays, navigation networks, research stations, and old military hardware that should have been useless in a modern war. But humans are terrible at leaving things alone. Mara Ellis, standing beside him, tried not to smile. Nathan tapped the board once. We are not starting the ship. We are giving it an antenna. The president asked how long. Nathan glanced at the countdown. Our fleet would enter high orbit in less than 9 minutes. Human crews were still connecting cables across the platform. 2 satellites had not accepted the software bridge. A weather radar station in Kansas was sending bad timing data. One relay in Alaska kept dropping sync because someone had routed power through a backup grid older than several cabinet members. Everything about the plan looked ridiculous, improvised, fragile, American in the most alarming possible way. Nathan took the coffee, drank the last cold inch, made a face, and said, "Give me 3 minutes and stop pointing cameras at me." That was it. No speech, no flag waving, no dramatic vow to protect the planet. Just 3 minutes and a complaint about cameras. The president stared at him for half a second, then turned to someone off screen. You heard him. Cut the public feed. The news helicopters were ordered back. The long-range military cameras stopped broadcasting. For the first time since the warship fell, the galaxy could no longer watch what the humans were doing inside it. Admiral Threx laughed when the screens went dark. He thought Earth had finally become afraid. Then every passive sensor in our fleet picked up the same impossible reading. Across the entire planet, millions of human devices began transmitting in perfect rhythm with the dead ship core. The first visible change was not in space. It was in the ocean. The water around the old hull went perfectly flat for almost half a mile, as if the Atlantic had forgotten how to move. Waves reached the boundary and simply softened, folding down into silence. On the command deck of our flagship, every alarm remained quiet, which somehow made it worse. Alarms mean a system knows what is happening. Silence means the system is still trying to decide whether reality has permission to continue. Admiral Threx stood before the forward display with his hands clasped behind his back, watching Earth grow larger beneath us. The planet looked harmless from high orbit. Blue water, white clouds, brown continents, little islands of light on the night side. A pretty world. A loud world. A world we had treated like a storage closet. Then the dead ship opened its eyes. Not literally, of course. Machines do not have eyes. That is what I would have said before Earth. But along the exposed spine of the vessel, buried under salt, damage, and centuries of shame, black panels began to glow one after another. No color at first. Just absence. Perfect squares of darkness deeper than the night around them. Then came the pulse. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. Every human device tied into Nathan Brooks's ridiculous network answered it. Weather radar in Oklahoma. Navigation beacons in Alaska. Civilian communication satellites over the Pacific. Old ocean buoys. Mountain observatories. Radio towers in the Midwest. Research dishes in New Mexico. The humans had not built a weapon. They had built a choir, and the ship was teaching it one note. Our fleet crossed into high orbit exactly on schedule. Admiral Threx opened the diplomatic channel, ready to demand compliance. He got through 4 words. Citizens of Earth, you're... Then his voice vanished from every transmitter at once. Not jammed. Not blocked. Removed. The channel stayed open, but the authority had been scooped out of it. Our communications officer tried secondary bands, then military bands, then command tight beam. Each one lit green for half a second and died politely, like a door being closed by someone on the other side. Threx turned slowly. Report. Navigation is drifting, said one officer. Weapons control is not responding, said another. External targeting has gone into diagnostic mode. Shield harmonics are desynchronized. Engine governors are accepting no priority input. Nobody shouted yet. We were too trained for that. But every voice had become careful. Below us, Earth said nothing. That was the worst part. No speech. No threat. No triumphant announcement. Just a primitive planet spinning quietly, while our cruisers forgot how to be cruisers. On the human feed, which our intelligence team managed to recover through a civilian news rebroadcast, Nathan Brooks stood inside the spine chamber with both hands resting on a console that had finally decided to listen to him. Mara Ellis asked if the field was stable. Nathan watched the orbital map, where 12 alien signatures had turned from sharp red triangles into confused yellow circles. He said, "Stable enough." Mara asked what that meant. Nathan looked up at the ceiling, toward the fleet he could not see, and answered, "It means they can still go home if they remember where they parked." Admiral Threx did what arrogant commanders always do when the universe stops obeying them. He blamed the instruments. For 6 precious minutes, he refused to accept that a species with no recognized warfleet had taken control of the battle without firing a single shot. He ordered diagnostics. He ordered manual override. He ordered the cruisers to rotate formation using visual confirmation, as if pride could substitute for functional engines. The ships answered with calm disobedience. Thrusters flickered, then settled. Targeting lenses opened, then politely closed. Shield emitters cycled through startup patterns and never reached alignment. Every system that made our fleet dangerous had been turned into a student waiting for permission. That was when Chief Engineer Voskar shoved past 2 officers, expanded the old warship schematics across the central display, and said the sentence that changed the room. They did not activate a weapon. They activated the governor. Nobody liked that word. A weapon attacks. A governor decides. The Dread Mercy had been built during an age so embarrassing our historians filed it under strategic excess. Its core did not destroy enemy systems. It introduced itself to them, learned their command language, and suggested they stop. At short range, against older ships, it could freeze a battlefield without breaking a window. That was why it had terrified our ancestors. That was why the restraint bands existed. It was not too weak for modern war. It was too persuasive. Admiral Threx stared at the schematic, his crest slowly lowering. "Impossible," he said. "The governor field had a maximum range of 200 miles. Voskar turned toward the blue planet below us. It did, before humans gave it every antenna on Earth. The display updated again, and my stomach went cold. Not from fear of death. This was worse than that. It was the fear of being outthought in public. The field was no longer coming from the half-submerged hull alone. It was bouncing, repeating, correcting itself through weather stations, ocean sensors, civilian satellites, deep space listening dishes, military radar, aircraft transponders, and thousands of devices that had never been designed to agree on anything. Humans had taken a retired control core and connected it to the noisiest civilization in known space. The result was not clean. It was not elegant. It was not supposed to work. That made it very human. Every time our computers tried to isolate the source, a new source appeared. Every time our signal officers blocked one frequency, 3 harmless civilian bands carried the pattern around it. Somewhere in Nebraska, a farm tower was helping hold a cruiser in place. Somewhere in Florida, a weather station was arguing with our shield grid. Somewhere above the Pacific, a commercial satellite designed to carry sports broadcasts had become part of a planetary command net. Our science officer whispered that it was inefficient. Voskar answered without looking at her. Inefficient things can still surround you. Down in the spine chamber, Nathan Brooks watched the same expanding map with the expression of a man who had found a leak exactly where he expected it. Mara Ellis asked whether the system would keep scaling. Nathan shook his head. Not forever. Then he tapped the outer edge of the orbital plot, where our enforcement carrier was still trying to recover control. But long enough for them to understand. The problem. Mara asked what problem. Nathan looked at the ancient reactor, then at the planet wrapped around it like a jury. They threw away a lock, he said. We gave it a neighborhood watch. The surrender did not arrive as a surrender. Proud empires hate simple words. Admiral Threx called it a temporary operational withdrawal pending diplomatic clarification, which fooled no one on his deck and absolutely no one on Earth. The humans heard the message, translated it, and immediately began making jokes about diplomatic clarification meaning, please give our steering wheel back. I would have been insulted if I had not been so busy watching 12 Concordance vessels drift in perfect, helpless formation above a planet we had called primitive. The governor field did not crush them. It did something far more humiliating. It made them wait. Every ship held position, engines limited to safe idle, weapons sealed behind polite diagnostic loops, command channels reduced to local audio, as if the fleet had been placed in timeout by a blue planet with weather balloons and stubborn engineers. Admiral Threx finally requested a direct channel to Earth. Not demanded, requested. That small change made half the command deck stare at the floor. The White House answered, but the face on the screen was not the president. It was Nathan Brooks, still wearing the same gray sweatshirt, still standing in the spine chamber, still looking like a man who wanted a shower more than a historic moment. Threx straightened to his full height and said Earth was interfering with Concordance military property. Nathan listened patiently, then asked if the Admiral meant the property they had thrown into Earth Ocean with an insult written on the side. No one translated that slowly enough to save Threx from understanding it. The Admiral said the vessel was classified technology. Nathan nodded. Then maybe do not litter. That sentence became the most replayed human phrase in galactic history for the next 3 standard years. It appeared on shirts, mugs, ship hull stickers, embassy walls, and one official Terran Navy training manual, though the Navy denied that last part until someone leaked the page. Threx asked what Earth wanted. Nathan looked off screen, listening to someone in the room, then faced the feed again. Safe departure vector. Formal recognition of Earth salvage rights. No retaliation. No more gifts. The Admiral bristled at the word gifts, but his fleet was still floating under human permission, so pride had to wait in line behind survival. The agreement was signed 4 hours later. Our ships left one by one, moving slowly at first, then faster as the field released them beyond lunar distance. Not a shot fired. Not a city touched. Not a heroic statue required. Earth won by reading the manual nobody else remembered existed, and then improving the machine with parts from its own noisy backyard. The final Concordance report tried to sound academic. It described adaptive reuse, unconventional systems integration, civilian infrastructure coupling, and emergent planetary defense behavior. All accurate. All useless. The private warning was shorter. Never discard technology on Earth. Never assume humans see waste the way we do. They look at broken things and imagine teeth. Years later, when I teach young officers about first contact risk, I show them the image of that old warship resting under Atlantic floodlights. I show them Nathan Brooks standing beside the core with coffee in one hand and alien history in the other. Then I tell them the truth we learned too late. The ship was never the nightmare. The nightmare was the species that looked at our garbage and saw a future,